Join us on a captivating journey as we explore the charm, history, and vibrant culture of Wilkes County. Discover the hidden gems, inspiring stories, and remarkable people that make Wilkes a place worth knowing and celebrating. Join us now and experience the unique essence of Life in Wilkes.
Well, Ken, good to see you again.
Good to be here, Mr. White. Good to be here.
You know, our last visit garnered a bit of interesting comments from people. Everything from Ken's a great storyteller, he's a great citizen, a great man, to I'll always remember him as the man with red shoes. It's good to have a reputation, isn't it?
I guess most. Yeah, I think I got several. To tell you the truth, not all of them I'd want to talk about, but
well, it's good to have one you can pick out and wear for the day.
Yeah.
We talked a few days ago about this visit and what we were going to talk about, just in sharing some of your history stories and stories about growing up in Wilkes County. And there was one story I was really glad that you wanted to share. And it's one that I think it may have been one of the first stories that you had shared with me that I thought was just a really nice story. It did tend to lean a little bit on the side of larceny, but is that when you burn things down?
Well, you know, I like to tell that story and refer to it as the one that just defines the childhood that I had.
Right.
And I was born at home up on Henshaw Street in North Wilkesboro a long time ago. And I make all kinds of comments about what a tough neighborhood it was,
right.
You know, that a cat with a tail was a tourist and things like that. But truly, it was a great place to live. On that hill where I was, there were 10 different women that you could almost call mama. Nice. These folks, you go in their home to get a drink of water, you didn't have to walk home to get a drink of water, you know, and it was just a great place to be. I can remember those ladies now just as clear as a bell. And last year we buried the 10th of my 10 Henshaw Street mother when we buried Mary Cashin last year.
Wow.
And just the funeral, which I was lucky enough to speak at, was the kind of thing that I kind of got me thinking about all of them. You know, it was just a real blessing to me. But growing up on Henshaw Street was a good place to be. But being my mama's baby boy and fair-haired child was the best place to be. My mother Carrie was a sweet soul, and she ruined me for all time and for all women. There's no question about that. But she always said it's okay to spoil a child or a dog if you spoil them with love. And see, that's what I have to give you is love. But I'm a puppy in a family full of old dogs. My parents had basically two families. They got married in the early 30s and had 2 boys right off in the 30s, and then had 2 more up in the late 40s, my other brother, Wayne, and me. And so when I was just a little boy, 5, 6 years old, 2 of my brothers were married and gone.
Oh, wow.
And one brother moved away. And the other brother was here, and his wife would come to see my mama, and she was helping her learn how to cook. This gal couldn't boil water without scorching it. And it wasn't a bit uncommon in those days for a daughter-in-law to spend some time with a mother-in-law. And my mother was proud to do it, glad to help her, and a wonderful cook, and willing to share anything with her, you know. But then this sister-in-law kind of starts giving my mother advice. You need to tighten up on that boy, Kenny. You're spoiling that boy, Kenny. That boy Kenny's going to be trouble for you if you don't rein him in.
So this was your sister-in-law?
My sister-in-law, 19 years old, couldn't cook, but knew all about raising children. Told my mom, if you don't get that boy reined in, he's going to be trouble for you for a long time. Well, I didn't need any help from my sister-in-law. I had a pretty good deal the way it was. Right. As I've told many people many times, my mother would wake me up out of a sound sleep if she couldn't remember telling me she loved me right before she went to bed. Or when I wanted applesauce, I may have told you this before, but if I wanted applesauce, my mother would sit down on the couch. I'd lay down and put my head in her lap, and she'd take two sharp spoons and a hard apple, and made Kenny's applesauce for him one bite at a time. We just traded spoons. It was a good place to be.
Is that why when we were out for dinner one time and you asked for applesauce, they looked at you and says, "No, not tonight."
Nobody treats me quite like Mama did. No. But anyway, so you move on a few years, and my buddy Mark Goodman and I, one of my neighbors down there, his mother was one of my moms, Audrey, loved her as long as she lived, and he and I had built a fort in a little patch of woods behind the Henshaw Street Baptist Church. Now, where I was brought up there, it was very much grown up. This was the only little patch of wood that didn't really belong to somebody, and so we could all play there, And we built an amazing fort in that tree. Now, granted, there was not a piece of wood in there that wasn't a scrap. They had to have the nails knocked out of it. Sure. The nails had to be put down on the sidewalk and beat down and straightened out with a hammer. But as far as we were concerned, that fort was the Taj Mahal of all forts. But somehow or another, we got in our head that there's a TV show, Fort Apache had these torches on the corners of their fort. And so we decided we were going to make us some torches to go with it. We found an old swing set that had been abandoned, and we finally got it tore apart. And if you recall, those pipes that hold up a swing set, about 2.5 inches of pipe, and so went down to Jones Avenue, and we crammed those pipes full of good dried broom straw, went back up to our fort, and we were so proud, and we lit those torches. And they were beautiful. It was great torches. We were amazing torch makers. But we had yet to have any classes in physics. And it wasn't too long, that pipe got warm. And then it got downright hot. And I was standing there thinking back and forth, trying to get in. And finally, Mark dropped his first. I don't care what he tells you. Mark dropped his first, and I dropped mine in the honeysuckle underneath the tree. Might as well have dropped them in a can of gas. Just whoosh, it went. Right up that tree, caught our fort on fire. The wind blew, and it caught the tree on fire and blew it through and burnt down that entire patch of woods. The only patch of woods in our end of town almost caught the Henshaw Street Baptist Church on fire. They called in the fire department and the Forest Service. Well, biblically speaking, there was weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth, believe me. And so my sister-in-law shows up for what she presumes to be the day of reckoning, for all days of reckoning. Well, this is one time that Kenny's little narrow butt has got to be in trouble. And I can still see my mama. And if I live to be 100, I hope I can still see her standing out there in the front yard with my sister-in-law. And my mother looked over there where the wood used to be, and she said, "But it lets in so much more light now, doesn't it?" And it was never mentioned again.
Oh, that was it.
And my sister-in-law would always tell folks, she said, "I wrote him off that day. I knew there was no hope for my brother-in-law, Kenny." But that was, and interestingly enough, she became like a daughter to my mom and daddy. My mother and dad had 4 sons, and that daughter, she was like a daughter to them, treated them like a king and a queen, and was just one of those folks that were a blessing to know, and I loved her as long as she lived. But we did have a rocky start.
Yeah. Well, I love that story. I mean, it's one of those stories, Ken, and you have to admit, when you hear that story, and you've said it over and over again, you shared the story, and I love it every time I hear it. But it's almost too fanciful to be true, isn't it? I mean, who has a life like that other than you and Huckleberry Finn? I mean, who has that type of a wonderful life? It is like a scene in a movie.
And I can clear that right up for you, because there's one thing my mother would say when I was a little boy that I'll never forget, when things would come up and it needed to be said. She would say, "If Kenny says it, it's so." And that would end those conversations, too.
That would take care of it. All right.
Yeah.
No more to say about that,
always, my mother told me I was the perfect child, and I can't imagine her ever telling me anything that she didn't think was the unvarnished truth, so I've gone with it ever since.
Mothers are incredible if we've got good ones, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. And, she was to know her to love her, and I miss her more than I could ever dream of telling you. And that's one thing that makes my office, where it's kind of like a poor man's museum I talk about at the Wilkes Record up on Main Street. And there's always things in there that folks will ask questions about, and it'll give me a good trigger to tell a story about my mom or my dad.
Right.
And that's a little selfish, but I do it a lot, and it kind of helps keep their memory alive. And I'm convinced that's the right thing to do.
So it's entertaining to other people, I'm sure, but does it do a little something for you too?
It warms my heart. It is. My visitors are the best part of my day, and a good part of that is the fact of all the things that something will trigger up. There was a gentleman in today this morning, 94 years old, on his birthday, and his daughter brought him in because I hadn't been in my place in a long time or something, and brought her by. And come to find out, he worked with some people I knew back in the 40s, and we just had a great visit, And I can't imagine what it made me think of some of those people if I hadn't had that old man bring them up. You see,
Sure.
So it's a lot of fun. I enjoy it, and me and the dog, like I said, we welcome everybody that comes by.
Yeah, that's great, Ken. I love that. Yesterday, Mark Cook was in, and we were talking about his family's history and how, it goes back to the 40s, right? And I mentioned that to you, and you shared a memory about their shop being on Main Street.
Yeah, Mr. Cook, Flake Cook, his grandfather, had a partner named Bob Kite, and the two of them ran a place called Carolina Home and Auto, I think was the name. Carolina Home and Auto. They were a B.F. Goodrich tire dealer, and they were into sporting goods things. I bought my first pair of Converse All-Stars in there when I was 11 years old and got my paper out.
The red shoes?
I bought black ones then.
Uh-oh.
But, but that's the first pair I've ever bought. Then it was 40 cents a toe back then. And I thought, that is so much, $4 for a pair of shoes.
Right.
But I'd made money in my paper route, and I bought them and I paid for them, and I was proud of it. But, yeah, and his grandfather, how do I say this? He could be a little abrupt sounding sometimes.
You're right.
But and I was kind of about half scared of him as a kid, and he always had a way of putting things that was very direct, but he also had a heart of gold. I also know that of uncounted circumstances where Mr. Cook had sent a truckload of furniture to folks that had a fire, a flood, or a problem, and he never wanted his picture made. He just wanted to help folks that needed it when they needed it, and he was a really wonderful man. That kind of kept that hid what he could, I think, sometimes.
Right.
But I remember that store. Remember that smell. They sold bicycles, and I smell those tires and stuff, And it was right beside Brame Drug Store, and that was. And then they moved it sometime later over to West Park, where they are still,
So really, life in North Wilkesboro back then, it was a bustling time, wasn't it?
Oh, the town was busy all on the streets on Saturday.
Every day is Saturday in these thriving mountain towns. Early morning finds its streets alive with the bustling activity of townspeople and county farmers and residents milling about the streets and shops. In this recent building era, civic-minded merchants with an eye to the future progress of the county have renovated and improved their shops to keep pace with this progress.
Sometimes they were so busy you'd walk on the edge of the road because the sidewalks were full of people. They came to town. And, of course, once I got a bicycle when I was 8, and once I was old enough to get a bicycle, Dad let me ride it to town. And from 8 years old on, I would ride to town, and I was allowed to ride to the river, but not any further. And then when I did get my paper out and had my own money, he let me go on across the river to the Y and get me, because I'd bought me a Y membership so I could learn how to swim.
Right.
And I never went to Wilkesboro, hardly ever, but I knew a lot about North Wilkesboro, and there were wonderful people there. One, I've talked about several of them at different times, but
was the Liberty Theater there then?
Oh, absolutely,
okay.
Absolutely. It was a dime to get into theater if you're under 12. Popcorn was a nickel, a Coke was a nickel. And then you had a nickel to go into Roses and buy a little candy when the movie was over. We'd go in there in the morning and watch all these serials. Tune in next week, and you go back next week, And we'd go in about 9 o'clock in the morning and stay till about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And you come outside in the summer, and you're like a mole, You had to let your eyes get adjusted. You'd been in the dark for 9 hours, But And
Now, was that for the price of one ticket?
Yeah, one person.
Okay.
Yeah, a dime for one person.
A dime.
to
I mean, you could stay the whole day.
Oh yeah, yeah. You pay first thing in the morning. You stay
Right.
till 11 o'clock at night.
And they didn't care.
And they had shows. The movies themselves showed 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and they opened at 11 o'clock 7 days a week.
Wow.
And old Colonel Forehand ran the theater for his father-in-law, a gentleman named Ivan Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
And Colonel Forehand was everything that the name Colonel goes with it. He was a military guy, and he was straight-laced. He had a scout troop at the Presbyterian Church. It was better organized than a lot of army groups
Right.
were. But he was a great guy and did a lot of good for a lot of kids, And
Well, is he the one with the big car?
oh well, his father-in-law had the big
His
car,
father-
the
okay, right.
'57 Cadillac Eldorado,
Right, right,
yeah,
right.
that with the stainless steel top and all that, people still talk about that car,
Sure.
you know.
I remember this story about it.
And the guy that ran the concession stand, a guy named Frank Jarvis, nice to every kid. If you're a nickel short, you go ahead and get that kind of thing, And what was funny about Frank is there was always this crowd of people in behind over there. Was a door to the outside that you'd come in to buy stuff too. And the same people are in there a lot. And as an adult, I found out he was running the bookie joint. And that's the reason the same guy, when he wasn't selling popcorn, he was covering every bet that Elbert Rhodes didn't cover, And just the things that went on are just fascinating,
Right. So there were lots of sides of the coin. Weren't
And
there?
many entrepreneurs of every description you could say. But it was a bustling town. It was really busy. It really was. And it was fun to go down there, and it was safe. I never occurred to me where the police department was. I didn't need them. It never crossed my mind. And folks were nice to you.
What do you miss the most from that time period?
Well, I don't know. It was. I enjoyed my paper route and all the people I met. That was a great fun. And but just the fact that my children never had the opportunity to enjoy an area like that in their lives. That's probably my biggest disappointment about what I miss about it the most, because I talk about it to them, and it's like a foreign country almost to what they grew up with. But there were just so many folks. I can't remember exactly what all I told you the last time I was here, but about my paper route. But I had people that would sell me things in their store and let me pay it by delivering the paper to them, and things like that, and opened up, you might say, accounts with them and stuff, But it was just a different world. I saw things that I didn't understand. Periodically, we'd see guys on these little look like carts of sorts that were horribly handicapped, and I finally asked what was, and these are World War II veterans that they were basically begging, and they'd bring them there, and there'd be street preachers out there preaching on 10th Street where they sold BEER.
Oh, of course.
My mother would not say the word. Right. And those street preachers would be out there. They'd have a big crowd. I mean, it was not a bit uncommon. Just things like you can imagine today, or you rarely ever see, I should say. I won't say you can't imagine it, but that was a common occurrence.
Wow.
But and there was a little everything could be bought in North Wilkesboro, from boats to, whatever you might need.
Right. Wow. So now when you walk down the streets, of course, some of the old buildings are still there, but everything's different. But life is different now, right?
It's a different world. It just is a different world, yeah.
All right. You got another story?
Well, talking about the town, and that's where so many of my stories come from. I've talked to you about Mr. Spainhour and Mr. Steele and different folks Mr. Carlton at the hardware store, those kind of things. Well, there was one place that I wasn't terribly familiar with, but I'd heard the story all my life, up on the 800 block above, a couple of doors up from the Carolina Home and Auto that Mr. Cook owned. There's a little restaurant there called the Princess Cafe. And the guy that ran it was named Jimmy Papyrus. And I dug through my stuff, and I've got his beer license from the 40s in some of my treasures. And he was a Greek guy. But he knew his clientele. He sold beans and potatoes and cornbread and such as that, and did a brisk business. And always dressed to the teeth, shiny shoes, three-piece suit, flower on his lapel, a handkerchief in his coat, just a fashionable kind of guy from way up north somewhere. And he was a widower. And anyway, in the process of time, a lot of the businessmen would meet there for afternoon coffee. And the one thing I do know about a group of men meeting in the afternoon for coffee is that men are by far and away worse gossips than women ever thought about being. You wouldn't believe some of the conversations I've heard through the years around that coffee shop when it was down at Brame Drug Store. But anyway, in these days, they met up at the Princess Cafe, and they noticed that Jimmy had sort of taken a fancy to one of his waitresses. And she was a young girl. And she had a bad reputation. But there really isn't but one way about 1955 or 56 in North Wilkesboro for that young lady to have a bad reputation. Well, these guys, in their infinite wisdom, decided somebody needs to clue this old boy in before she breaks his heart and takes his money and just turns him in and just kills him, breaks his, and they worried and they talked about it and they whispered back and forth and they said, so we got to talk to him. So they finally decided that one of them would just go in there one afternoon and kind of clue him in on where the world was,
Right.
Well, that lot apparently failed to Watson Brame. And so Mr. Brame goes in there one afternoon, and he pulls up, gets in the chair, and they bring him some coffee, and he sees Jimmy, and he waves, come here a minute, and Jimmy comes up, slides in the other side of the booth, says, what you got on your heart, Watson? And I just wanted to talk to you a little bit, and they talked about nothing. On and on they went, and finally, Mr. Brame said, about that little gal you've been kind of squiring around. Ain't she a peach, Jimmy said. His face just lit up, so happy about this wonderful lady he was getting to spend some time with, and Mr. Brame stumbled and stuttered and stammered and finally got around saying, Jimmy, don't you understand that gal has slept with every man in North Wilkesboro? And I said, Jimmy leaned back in the booth and said, yeah, but it's a small town. We should all have such a good attitude.
Oh, it is a small town.
And so that and up and down the street they go. There's stories with all of them, and they're fascinating and they're fun, and things like it doesn't. It was these folks. All these folks was like an independent little country. It was their business, and that you never heard the government mentioned about anything. Hardly at all,
And it's not because it wasn't there. It's just because they were enjoying their own life.
Yeah, and they had autonomy. They could do as they put within common sense and reason if they pleased.
Right.
But it was, but those are the things that I remember so well is the different folks, and the gentleman that I talked about that sold the popcorn to the theater, Mr. Frank Jarvis. He again was one of those folks that did not know me from Adam's house cat except buying that popcorn. But as long as he lived, long after he wasn't there, he called me by name every time he'd see me. Just a great guy, but he helped us when we were strangers. He didn't know who we were and we didn't have a nickel. We go ahead, kind of thing. And the lady that took up the money at when you first went to pay your ticket, her name was Ms. Hadley. And she looked to be 1,000,000 years old. I don't know, but she just as sweet as she could be. And would, if there wasn't just a huge line, would always have something. Well, how's your mom and dad? Or and everybody knew everybody. And that probably that part that everybody knew everybody was probably I miss that as much as anything.
That's really it. That's the key, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just people being able to do what we're doing now.
Mm-hmm.
Just sit down, have a conversation. I know there have been times we've sat and had coffee and stories have been told, but it was just that process of being together and talking, sometimes not about a whole lot, but it was still medicine for the moment.
Good way to put it, medicine for the moment. Yeah.
That's a good thing. Well, Ken, I guess you're not surprised. We've done it again, right? We've filled up a half an hour.
Can't not have been a half an hour. Can't be.
That's right. It's 31 minutes. And
I've got so much
37
more stuff for you.
Well, that's why we call this was part 2. Part 3's next.
Well, next we'll bring Roy Lowe in to visit, okay?
Oh, my gosh. I think you talked about, Roy Lowe. My goodness. That's a great thing. Ken, we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you for spending time with us on Life in Wilkes. We value you as a viewer and appreciate when you share the show with your friends and family. Be sure to bookmark our channel and join us again on the next episode of Life in Wilkes.